If you've ever seen something unexplained in healthcare, trust me, you are not alone. If you work in healthcare, you already know some of the strangest things happen when you're just trying to do your job. What's up, and welcome back. And if you're new here, I am Denise.Jewels, and I am going to present to you a little compilation of creepy healthcare related stories. Some of them happened in the home healthcare setting, some of them happen while transporting patients, and some of them happen where they just shouldn't have been. But in all of these stories, you will see the very same trend. Something was very, very wrong. This compilation, we're going to get into a collection of healthcare related horror stories that will have you looking twice down every empty hallway. And maybe even questioning, what did you hear? Are you tripping, or is it really something going on? This one is going to be a little bit shorter than my usual compilations. I'm going to keep it about 30 minutes. But one of the reasons why you're going to want to stick around to the very end, because you will find out why you should never whistle at night. This is a new story that hasn't been uploaded to TikTok or Facebook. It's just for you, boo. I hope that you have your snacks, something to drink, a blanket to cuddle up with, and all your lights on, because now we are getting into the creepy stories. I was on the elevator with my patient when the lights went out. Y'all, a fellow nurse sent me this story, and she said this is one of the scariest moments of her entire career. In 2008, she was a step down nurse, and one of her patients had a sudden change in status. And if you don't work in healthcare, just know sis had a whole list of orders that she needed to happen immediately. One of them was a stat CT. So she got everything ready and she went into the patient's room to get them ready for transport. And that's when the smell hit her. Sulfur. She stopped, she checked the patient, but he was clean. Nothing unusual. So naturally, she brushed it off. She continued getting him ready for transport. And when they reached the elevator, the transportation tech suddenly paused. He said, "Hey, I'll meet you downstairs. I'll take the stairs." She thought it was a little bit strange, but she didn't really have time to question it. Would you have rode on that elevator alone? Let me know down in the comments. So she pushes the button for the floor that they're supposed to go on. The door is closed and the elevator starts to go down, right? Then it kind of jolted to a stop. She waited because she knew that elevator was a little bit janky and it was probably nothing, but then the lights flickered and the temperature inside that elevator suddenly dropped. She said she hurried up and pressed that emergency call button. And when she turned around, y'all, right in the corner where she had been standing, there is a little girl just looking at her. The little girl looked at her and said, "Shh." And then the elevator lights went completely out just for a moment. And when they came back on, little Shushy was gone. But then the elevator moved, and then the intercom crackled, and a voice came across that said, "Last stop." When the elevator doors opened, it wasn't the floor that she had selected, nor one that she recognized. And she knew that hospital because she had been there for 3 years at this point. Eventually, she got her patient where he needed to be, but she immediately contacted her nursing supervisor and she told them that they needed to take over. She left and she never worked another night shift after that. So you already know, I gotta ask you, do you think that the transportation tech knew something before he went up there? And would you have finished out your night shift? Let me know down in the comments. And if you have a story you would like to share, you can send it to Denise.Jewelsstories@gmail.com. And if you want to support my content a little bit more, there will be links down in the comments for that as well. And as always, have your best spooky day. Bye. You want to hear what happens when someone who lived on hate finally starts to die? Way back when I was a CNA, I worked in a nursing home with this patient I'm just going to call Gretchen. And Gretchen did not like brown skinned people, and she was very open about it. She would spit at us, she would call us slurs, and she was so abusive that eventually only the white techs were able to go in to care for her. And child, she was even mean to the white techs. But Miss Gretchen, she had a routine. Every night at 9:25, she would turn on her call light. Same routine, same hatred. But one night, after being put to bed, the tech came back to the nurse's station and she was shaking. She said that Gretchen was acting a little bit different. She was scared. Gretchen was in her room claiming that there was a little black boy in her room grabbing her by her ankles. We thought maybe she was just sundowning, so we brushed it off. Then that call light went off again, and the nurse was already on her way down the hallway to pass meds. And when she walked in that room, she suddenly yelled, "I need help now." Y'all, and Gretchen's little evil self was right there on the floor. The nurse swore that Gretchen screamed that the little black boy had pulled her off. And again, we just brushed it off. It was the end of the shift. But that next night, 9:25 came and went and no call light. At 10 p.m., the nurse came in to give Gretchen her meds and she was refusing to get in the bed. She said, "If you want to support my content a little bit more, there is a link down in the comments so that you can shop my merchandise, buy me a coffee, or have a cameo, which is a personalized video." Gretchen said, "The boy is back, and now there's a big black man with him." Now, as I was walking down the hallway to answer the call light, I glanced inside that room, and at the foot of the bed, I did see two dark figures standing and watching. I kind of froze, but then I looked away to go answer that call light. I finished up my task, and when I walked back down that hallway, the figures were gone. A few minutes later, Miss Gretchen call light came on again. Now the nurse was back at the nurse's station at this point, and the tech was going down to answer the light. So I went in there as backup because of what I saw. The other tech entered the room before I did, and she said, "Miss Gretchen is not breathing." And as I looked towards the nurse's station to call for help, I looked towards the exit. After that, I could see a small, dark figure carrying Miss Gretchen by her ankles and a tall, dark one carrying her by her shoulders, hammock style. Needless to say, Gretchen never turned that call light on again. So you already know I gotta ask you, what do you think I seen in that room that night? Let me know what you think about this story down in the comments. And as always, have your best spooky day. Bye. He looked the EMS driver dead in the eyes and asked, "Please tell me I'm going to be okay." And then he went limp. Baby, this story was sent to me from a viewer who says he works as an EMS driver down in New Orleans. And when I tell you I don't know what's going on down there, but I need to let you all know that you need to make sure that you are having some clean spiritual practices around you, this is your story. Because according to this viewer, this started off as a medical emergency, but by the time they had got this man to the hospital, he wasn't so sure what he was dealing with was completely human. Now, here's a little bit of tea to catch you up on what happened with Homeboy. Now, apparently, this man had did some type of love spell on this woman that he was interested in. And let's just say it worked a little too well. But once they started dating, this woman came extremely attached to him, too clingy, too fast, too much. He wasn't ready. So he decided he was just going to end the relationship, right? But if you know anything about a love spell, you already know sis didn't take that too well. That's when she came at him with that butcher knife and stuck it right through his chest, all while allegedly saying, "If I can't have you, no one will." Now that's when he showed up. Blood everywhere from his injuries. They loaded him onto the ambulance and they immediately started transporting him to the closest hospital, doing what they can to keep him alive until he gets there. That's when he looks directly at the EMS driver and he asks, "Do you want to hear some creepy stuff from Denise.Jewels? Buckle up, it's story time. Please tell me I'm going to be okay." And before the viewer could respond, that man went limp. His heart went into V-fib and then he completely flatlined. They're pushing medications, trying to avoid compressions, but they're giving him breaths and they get him stabilized enough just to reach the hospital. But see, that's when he says something happened that he still just can't explain. Soon as they got that man out of the ambulance and was pushing him into the hospital, that's when he seen her. A dark figure, but definitely looked like a woman. And she slowly followed that stretcher right on into that trauma bay. He said as soon as he seen that figure, he knew that he was getting out of there. because he had absolutely no interest to see what happened to that man next. So you already know, I gotta ask you, what do you think was following that man into that trauma bait? Let me know what you think about this story down in the comments. And if you have a story you would like to submit, you can send it to Denise.Jewels stories at gmail.com. And as always, have your best spooky day. Bye. Don't say sorry now, stand on business. This story comes from a viewer who says she used to take care of this proud K Clan member. She worked in a nursing home as a CNA and she took care of him for about 2 years. But during his last week, it still shakes her to her core what happened. She said a little bit about a week before he passed, the man started crying out and he would say something over and over again. The people are back to get me. Now, the staff, knowing his history, thought that he was just really sundowning. They didn't think too much of it until they would go and put him in bed. And after a few days, they noticed that he would always be screaming out. He would tell them that he was on fire. He would throw the blankets off of the bed and he would literally jump out of the bed even though he couldn't walk. It was almost like he was trying to get away from something that they couldn't see. This went on for about 3 or 4 days. And then one day they went in and checked on him and he was completely comatose. They sent him out to the hospital for evaluation and they didn't find anything wrong with him. They just said that that was his new norm. He came back. Everybody just figured that he was just a complete care patient at this point. But baby, on that third day, that man. And shout out to Brittany with the B for fueling this story time as she was giving me a whole bunch of gifts during live. Thanks, boo. That comatose man turned on his call light, and when staff went to go respond to it, that man sat straight up in the bed and said, I just want to say I am so. And child, before that man could even finish his final statement, she said it looked like something reached right from behind him, like a hand, go across his mouth and pull him directly back to the bed. He never spoke about being a proud Klans member again. So you already know I gotta ask you, what do you think that man was seeing during that week? Let me know what you think down in the comments. And if you want to support my content journey a little bit more, there will be links down in the comments so that you can either buy me a coffee so you can get a shout out, you can get a cameo video, which is a personalized video just for you, or you can buy some of my merchandise. Think about it. And as always, have your best spooky day. Bye. You know you my boo. We are about halfway through our compilation, so you already know I need to check in with you and I need you to tell me which one was the creepiest to you so far. The next one coming up really creeped me out, so you let me know what you think of it and make sure you hang out until the end so you can find out why Toto helped this home health aide never whistle at night again. This is the night shift that made me teach for a little bit because, baby, I don't think that was an angel I seen that night. Now, I was called to do a last minute hospice case in the middle of a winter storm that was brutal, but the pay that they offered, the money. I should have known that something was off. The moment I pulled into that driveway, my body was screaming to go back home. The money, of course, I didn't listen. His daughter was already standing at the door. She didn't even wait for me to knock. And the first thing that kind of set me off was these big old black flies in the windowsill in the middle of a snowstorm. Baby girl rushed past me, frantic, jittery, no goodbye to her dying father, no kiss, no I love you. I mean, she just bust up. And then that silence just hit, that thick, pressurized silence where, the only sound I was hearing was that buzz from them flies slamming up against the glass. I go to grab the TV remote to break the silence, and that's when I heard it. A low, wet moan. I froze. I went to go lay a second pair of eyes on Bert, and he hadn't moved since before. He was still breathing and very much alive. And as I turned to go back towards the living room, I caught a shadow darting past the hallway. I thought it was my reflection at first, or maybe I was just trying to convince myself, but it wasn't. Because about an hour later, I hear it. Thump, thump, thump. Heavy footsteps directly above me. I muted the TV and my heart was literally in my throat. I could have choked. The only sound in that house was the flies, and it was completely hot, unbearable. I'm trying to distract myself because the weather is terrible. I'm doing some nursing homework, and somewhere in there, I must have dozed off from the stress. I'm human, not machine. When I woke up, the house was dead silence, and the sound of the flies were coming from a more distant place, like the back of the hallway where Bert's room was. I hop up, realizing, like, damn, girl, you been asleep. I rushed to check on him, and flies were swarming his body, a black cloud right over the bed. I go shoot him away. I give him like some oral care to clean out his mouth, try to give him like a little dignity. And as I cleaned his mouth, he coughed and a fly came right from behind his teeth. I almost passed out. I finished up what I was doing, and that's when I realized that every fly had returned to the windowsill, like they were waiting on something. I walked past the staircase and I felt the temperature drop. And then that smell hit me. And if you know, you know, I'm talking about sulfur. I can hear Bert with the death rattle, his breathing has changed. So I rushed to call his daughter and no answer. So I leave a message like, hey, you should come back to the house now. I tried to call her again and still no answer. So I turned back to go to his room, and that's when I seen it. A tall, dark, hooded figure, darker than his room, walked right into his doorway. In the moment that it crossed his threshold, Bert bolted straight up in that bed. His eyes opened wide. His hands were pushing the air like he was fighting something that I just couldn't make out. But that figure slowly just moved towards the head of the bed. And when it got to the head, Bert fell right back. I believe he had passed because that's when I watched that thing reach into his chest and pull something out and walk right through the wall. And all them damn flies followed it. This is when I first started in healthcare, and I have seen a lot of people pass since then, but baby, I ain't never seen anybody be collected like that. So you tell me, do you think that it was something in that house, or do you think Bert was just one of those people who lived his life on the wrong side of things? Let me know what y'all think about that story down in the comments. And as always, have your best spooky day. Bye. I was on a plane to Bali to celebrate finishing up residency when I heard the question that nobody wants to hear. Is there a doctor on board? This story comes from a viewer and he says this is one flight that he will never forget. It was June 2016 and he remembers sitting there scratching his neck thinking like nobody knows I'm a doctor. But then his mama stood up right next to him. My son is an ER doctor. And before she could even finish that sentence, he felt someone grab his arm from behind him. And when he turned around, he saw a man laying on the floor, clutching his chest, his face twisted up in pain. And there was this horrible smell coming from him, like doo doo. While he was standing there assessing the man, he went completely unresponsive. So he dropped down to the floor and he started CPR. Then another passenger climbed over the seats and she said, it is time, do to do, for some moral justice, do to do. She said, I'm an ER nurse. I'll do breaths while you do compressions. The flight attendant rushed over with a little basic emergency medical kit and they started working on the man together. They took a moment to put the AED pads on the man's chest, but as the doctor looked down at that man's arm, something made him freeze. There was an indentation in his skin, like something had its fingers wrapped around the man's arm. Except there was nothing there. And right in front of him, he seen a scratch appear, and then another, and then another. It looked almost like invisible claws were slowly dragging down the man's arm. Him and the nurse kept doing CPR. They tried everything that they could, but that man never got his heartbeat back. Everything came to an end, and when he finally went back to his seat, he was completely exhausted, and he felt his mother kiss him on his forehead. You did good, baby. And she looked at him and said, you did everything you could. But I don't think that man was a good man. So he looked at her like, well, what do you mean? She said, while you guys were working on him, I seen a dark figure holding him down. He looked back at where they were previously working, and of course, there was nothing there, but he did remember those scratches on that man's arm and how very visible they were. So you already know I gotta ask you, what do you think was on that plane? Let me know what you think down in the comments. And as always, have your best spooky day. Bye. Hospice nurse sent me this story and she says every word is true. Baby, I was shaking like an aggressively unattractive stripper reading this story, but y'all let me know what y'all think. She said that she took this private duty case down in Louisiana. She was caring for this woman named Marie. Now, Marie lived in this Gothic style home just outside of Baton Rouge. But the moment that sis walked through that front door, she said something felt wrong. And then when she looked over, sitting in this wooden rocking chair near the entrance was an old antique clown doll, and right beside it was a porcelain doll. That was time for me to go. She said she caught herself staring at them for a little bit too long because then when the daytime caregiver walked up and started speaking, she had startled her just a little bit. The caregiver gave her a walk through the house, introduced her to Miss Marie, and Miss Marie had advanced dementia. She was mute, she was bedridden, and she barely reacted to anything around her. But after the day shift nurse left, she prepared Mrs. Marie nighttime medications, and that's when she heard it whispering, soft and faint, just enough to make her stop what she was doing. In the moment that she stopped, the whispering stopped as well. Being from the area, she had just told herself that it was an old house and it had a lot of history, and so it was going to make some strange noises, and she ignored it. But child, she should have quit because a few shifts later, something happened that she still can't explain to this day. So she said she was sitting on the couch with one earbud in, she's charting her notes, and suddenly she feels like a cold breath right against her neck. And as she spun around to look, she noticed that that rocking chair by the front door was empty, and that antique clown was sitting on the end table right beside her. She said she hurried up and walked into the kitchen. She turned on some gospel music and let it play for the rest of her shift. The next morning, she called that agency like, hey, do you think that you can put me on another case? Because this ain't going to work. And they came to an agreement, but just after they begged her to cover one more night. And she said it felt like her soul left her body when she agreed. But homegirl said she was ready. She said she arrived the next night and she had everything that she could think of that would make her feel spiritually protected in that home. But before she could even get settled in, the day shift caregiver gave her the creeps. Sis looked right at her with pure fear in her eyes and said, I put that clown and that porcelain doll in that closet. And then she looked at her and said, I swear they were whispering. The viewer froze and she thought back to her first night, and maybe she wasn't imagining anything after all. And that shift just seemed to crawl on by until 3 a.m. Someone was aggressively knocking at the front door, and when she looked at the peephole, it was the day shift caregiver. She was super confused, so she opened the door, and the caregiver was absolutely pale, shaking, and she was holding that antique clown in one hand and the porcelain doll in the other. She said, please tell me you put these in the trunk of my car. My viewer just stared at her like, why would I do that? What are you talking about? So apparently, after homegirl got home, the neighbor heard loud knocking coming from the trunk of her parked car and called the police. The officers arrived and they heard the knocking too. So they tried to figure out who car it was. Clearly, they found her. And when she unlocked that trunk, the knocking instantly stopped. And as she opened it, inside was that clown and that porcelain doll sitting still upright, facing the opening of the trunk. So you already know I gotta ask you, would you have finished that shift or would you have left right along with that day shift caregiver? Let me know what you think about that story down in the comments. And as always, have your best spooky day. Bye. All right, you still here with me? Come here. You know what time it is. It's time for a kiss. Mwah. I appreciate you so much. Now, before I get into this last story, there is something that you should know by now. It hasn't been on TikTok or Facebook. This is the first group of people that are going to hear it. And if you made it this far, I am so very happy. Thank you for helping me with my retention. You know you appreciate it. So before I get off of here and sign out and give you this last story, just know, stay safe, stay curious, and as always, have your best spooky day. Bye. It is time. Man, F that dog. And wait, before you get mad. This story comes from a viewer who used to work as a home health aide, and fooling with the dog is exactly how she got in this situation. She said that she had learned a rule that she had never heard of: never whistle after dark. She said this happened in 1995 in Austin, Texas. She was working as a midnight home health aide, and she was taking care of this elderly woman named Eunice. Now, Eunice had this little dog, we just gonna call him Toto, and he followed her everywhere she went. But one night, the caregiver was feeling a little bit restless, things were really quiet, and she decided to step out for a little bit of fresh air. And the second she opened that door, Toto bolted right past her. Exhausted, she really didn't want to run after him, so she thought to herself, forget that dog. But she knew Eunice would be disappointed, so she ended up going after him anyways. Disappeared into this tall, overgrown grass near the property tree line, and she called his name, and nothing. So she like, let me get a little bit closer. So she walked closer into the overgrown grass, and she called his name again, and still nothing. So she did what she always had done when she was trying to get Toto back into the house. Y'all, she whistled for the dog. And a moment later, something whistled back. She froze and she looked around because it didn't come from the direction that Toto had ran off in. And as she looked towards the trees, that's when she saw it: a dark figure standing just beyond the property line, completely still, like it was watching her. And child, when she seen it, why that dang on thing whistled again. She said if you would have seen her in that moment, all you would have seen was elbows and heels because she was hurrying up back to that condo. She didn't need as much fresh air as she thought she did. About an hour later, she hears Toto scratching at the door, coming back like nothing happened. When she went to go let him in, she looked toward the end of the driveway, and there the figure was again. But this time she could see it was tall with broad shoulders and wearing what looked like a top hat. She said she hurried up, slammed that door, locked it so she could finish her shift, and she quit that job the very next morning. And you would think that was the end of the story, right? Wrong. A few months later, after a night out with her friends, she's walking alone to her apartment. Everything was quiet, and then she heard it: a whistle. That exact same whistle that she had used to call Toto that night. Every hair on her body stood up, and then she slowly turned around, and there he was, the hatman. She sprinted up to her apartment and locked every single lock she had, and she tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination. But at some point during the night, she woke up, and standing outside her bedroom window was that same tall figure in the top hat, just watching her. And baby, he watched her for years after that. She said she refused to go outside after dark, and she always had her curtain shut after that. Eventually, she found someone who claimed they could remove the energy that it had attached itself to her, and she hasn't had the issue since. But you already know I gotta ask you, have you ever heard someone whistle back when there hasn't been anyone there? And do you whistle alone in the dark? Let me know down in the comments. And as always, have your best spooky day. Bye.